Months later, I drove past a quiet retirement home in Fort Worth. My father sat in the passenger seat, pointing it out with a hint of irony in his voice. "That's where she ended up," he said. I glanced at the building, its beige walls and small windows, and felt a strange calm wash over me. Michael's mother had been forced into retirement after the court case, her reputation destroyed, her influence gone. The same woman who tried to erase me now lived in the shadows, forgotten by the very community she once ruled. Poetic justice, I thought. Not loud, not violent, but quiet and permanent. I parked the car by the river that evening, the sun painting the sky in gold and crimson. My father and I sat on the hood, watching the water move slow and steady. I pulled the court ruling from my bag, the paper still crisp, and whispered, I wasn't erased after all. My life wasn't the one I had planned. There were no wedding rings, no honeymoon photos, no vows under glowing lights. But what I had gained was something stronger. I had found my voice, my strength, and the power to stand against those who thought they could write me out of my own story. Sometimes justice doesn't come with applause or revenge shouted from rooftops. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the steady beating of your own heart when you realize you survived. As the sky darkened, I thought of all the women who had been sidelined, overlooked, erased in their own ways. I hoped my story would reach them, that they would know strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, I am still here. And with that whisper, I closed the chapter of my past and stepped quietly into my future, no longer afraid of being erased, because the truth had already carved my name where no one could take it away. I didn't grow up with much. Tulsa was a working-class town, and my father raised me after my mother left when I was 12. He worked long hours at the rail yard, and I worked nights at a diner to help us keep the lights on. Those long hours taught me resilience. They also taught me to value every dollar and every honest smile. Nursing school was my escape, and it was in the cafeteria, over burnt coffee, that I first met Michael. He was warm, steady, and seemed like someone who wanted a simple life like me. For years we built that dream together. He talked about buying a small house in Fort Worth, raising kids, and growing old side by side. I held on to those promises. But what I didn't realize was that love can be tested not by storms or distance, but by family. His mother, polished and sharp-tongued, never accepted me. At first it was small remarks. She doesn't fit our circle. Then it became open hostility. I still remember one 4th of July barbecue at his family's home in Fort Worth. The fireworks crackled overhead, and I carried a homemade pie to the table. His mother leaned close to a neighbor and said, loud enough for me to hear, "She won't last a year. He'll wake up soon." The words struck me harder than the summer heat. Michael noticed my silence but brushed it off, telling me, "Mom just doesn't know you yet." That night, I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. It wasn't just ignorance. It was deliberate. And I wondered then if I could ever belong in a family that already marked me as an outsider. When Michael proposed, I thought things would change. I said yes under the glowing lights of a small restaurant in Houston, tears running down my cheeks. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine I could have the kind of life other women posted about online: weddings, anniversaries, children's birthdays. We started planning right away. My dream was simple, a modest but heartfelt wedding where the people who loved us could gather. I didn't care about expensive centerpieces or gold-trimmed invitations. I cared about joy, honesty, and love. But almost immediately, his mother inserted herself into every detail. She insisted on handling the contracts, the registry, even the guest list. "To lighten your load," she said sweetly. Michael encouraged me to let her take over. It's her way of showing she cares. I wanted to believe that, but deep inside, my gut whispered otherwise. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to grab water and froze. Through the half-open door, I heard her on the phone. Her voice was low, sharp, and deliberate. "Don't worry. I'll make sure she doesn't belong." My stomach twisted, and the glass nearly slipped from my hand. I didn't tell Michael what I heard. I wanted to believe love could be stronger than whispers. But that sentence lodged itself in my chest like a splinter, one I couldn't shake free. As the weeks passed, her control grew heavier. The venue contracts were signed under her name. The guest list sat locked on her laptop. She even had the florist call her instead of me. At first, I convinced myself it was tradition that maybe in some families the mother-in-law ran the show. But when I saw the rehearsal dinner seating chart, my blood ran cold. My name was missing. Michael brushed it off. "It's just a mistake," he said, pulling me close. "You worry too much." But mistakes don't repeat themselves so perfectly. Mistakes don't erase the bride from her own event. That night, I sat alone at the dining table, sewing the lace edge of my veil by hand. Each stitch was a prayer, a desperate attempt to anchor myself to a dream slipping away. My chest ached with hope and fear in equal measure. Then, like a cruel joke, the next morning I opened an email from the wedding planner. Attached was a schedule, neat and polished. My title read, "Guest." My heart pounded so loud I thought the neighbors might hear. The engagement party in Houston should have been a celebration. Friends and family gathered in a backyard strung with fairy lights. I wore a soft blue dress, trying to hold onto some sliver of happiness. But when Michael's mother introduced me to one of her church friends, her words nearly stopped my heart. "This is Clara," she said with a smile that hit a knife. "But don't get too used to her. Nothing's permanent." The laughter that followed sliced deeper than any insult I had ever heard. I forced a smile, my hands clutching the hem of my dress so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Later that night, Michael apologized. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "She doesn't mean it. Don't let it ruin this for us." But what he didn't understand was that her words weren't accidents. They were weapons, sharpened over years of practice. I called my best friend Lena the next day, my voice breaking. She listened quietly, then said something I'll never forget. "Document everything. Every word, every change, every missing piece. Paper trails don't lie." I didn't know then how right she would be, because that same week, I checked the marriage license draft Michael had left on the counter. My name was missing again. My role had been crossed out in pen, and a blank space stood where I should have been. My heart thudded against my ribs as I realized the truth. This wasn't sloppy planning. This was deliberate. Someone was rewriting my life before it even began. The night I caught Michael in the study, everything I had tried to ignore came crashing down. I had woken up thirsty and walked quietly down the hallway. The door was cracked open, and through the narrow space, I saw him sitting at the desk. Papers were spread across the table, and his mother stood right behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder, like she owned him. He was signing something quickly, his jaw tight, his eyes avoiding hers. My heart pounded as I leaned closer, careful not to make a sound. The sound of the pen scratching the paper felt louder than thunder. I couldn't see the words, but I didn't need to. I knew in my gut that it had to do with me, and it wasn't good. My stomach knotted as I pressed my back against the wall, listening to her whisper, "You're doing the right thing. She doesn't belong here." The sentence echoed in my ears long after I slipped back to bed, pretending to be asleep when he returned. The next morning, I asked him directly what he had been working on. He looked at me with calm eyes and said, "Nothing important, just bills." His lie was smooth, practiced, and it broke me more than if he had shouted. Love is supposed to be honest. But the man I thought I knew was hiding something that had the power to erase me. I spent that day moving through the house like a ghost, replaying his words in my mind. Was I crazy to doubt him? Was I paranoid to think he would stand with his mother over me? Each question felt like a knife twisting in deeper. I wanted so badly to trust him, but trust doesn't survive lies. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my journal open, writing a single question over and over again. Am I disposable? When I finally closed the book, my hand was shaking. And when I looked up, I saw the envelope he had left on the counter, sealed but not hidden. My chest tightened as I reached for it, knowing this could change everything. Inside that envelope was the truth I had feared. It wasn't a love letter or a bill. It was paperwork, drafts of guest lists, contracts, and even a prenup with my name crossed out. In its place was a blank line, as if I had never existed. My throat closed, and my vision blurred, but I forced myself to read every word. It wasn't just sloppy planning. It was deliberate. Someone had rewritten my place in this story, line by line. I took photos of every page with trembling hands, my heart hammering so loudly I thought it would wake the whole street. When Michael came home that evening, I smiled at him like nothing was wrong, but inside I was crumbling. How could I sleep beside someone who might be helping erase me? The next day, I drove to my father's house in Tulsa. I sat on his porch with a cup of sweet tea, staring out at the quiet streets I had grown up on. The world felt safer there, but my heart was still breaking. Maybe love was a trap, I whispered to myself. My father sat beside me in silence, his hand covering mine. He didn't have to say anything, his presence was enough. Still, silence wasn't going to save me. I called Lena, my best friend, and poured out everything. She listened, then said, "You need help. I know someone." She gave me the number of Mrs. Green, a retired paralegal in Dallas known for catching fraud cases that others missed. When I met her 2 days later, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "This isn't just family drama. This is fraud." Her voice carried no pity, only conviction. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't losing my mind. Someone believed me. Someone was willing to fight. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Mrs. Green became my lifeline. She taught me how to collect evidence, to follow the small trails others overlooked. People hide lies in plain sight, she told me, but paper leaves shadows. She showed me how to look at email metadata, timestamps, and drafts. She gave me a scanner and told me, "Document everything. Don't let them bury you." For weeks, I lived two lives. On the outside, I was still the fiancé planning a wedding. On the inside, I was an investigator piecing together a puzzle designed to erase me. I printed emails, saved receipts, and copied files when no one was looking. Each page I collected was like a brick building a wall between me and Michael. But then came the night I found the proof that changed everything. I intercepted an email between his mother and the venue manager. Her words were bold, written without shame. "Replace her name with the one we agreed on. Payment will be sent once it's finalized." My hands shook as I read it, bile rising in my throat. She hadn't just tried to humiliate me. She had paid someone to erase me. I sat there staring at the screen, tears rolling down my face. Betrayal isn't just an action. It's a wound that keeps bleeding, no matter how hard you try to stop it. I printed the email and tucked it into my folder of evidence, the pages thick with lies and signatures. That night, as I lay in bed beside Michael, I stared at the ceiling and thought, how long has he known? The silence between us grew heavier, a wall I couldn't climb. I wanted to shake him awake, to scream, to demand the truth. But instead, I stayed quiet, listening to the sound of his steady breathing, knowing tomorrow I would bring this evidence to Mrs. Green. Mrs. Green studied the email with sharp eyes, then leaned back in her chair. "We can freeze this," she said. "File a legal hold. Stop everything until this is reviewed." The word freeze gave me a strange sense of hope, like a fire being smothered before it consumed everything. We filed the request, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had taken back a piece of control. But the victory was short-lived. When Michael found out, his calm mask shattered. He slammed the door behind him and shouted, "You're ruining everything. Why are you dragging strangers into this? You're supposed to trust me." His anger cut deeper than his silence ever had. I stood frozen, the folder of evidence clutched in my hands, my voice trapped in my throat. He looked at me like I was the enemy, like I was the one destroying our future. His mother's words had become his own. Later that night, I sat on my father's porch again, tears soaking the pages of my journal. My father listened quietly before saying, "Strength isn't noise, Clara. It's patience. You'll see." His words wrapped around me like a blanket, but they couldn't hide the fear that Michael was slipping away from me completely. The next morning, I received a notice in the mail confirming the freeze. The marriage license was officially on hold. Relief rushed through me, but it was quickly replaced by dread. because now I knew what I had to face next. The wedding day itself. The day of the wedding arrived, and with it came a storm I couldn't avoid. The venue glowed with flowers and lights, the same hall where I had once imagined my future unfolding. But this time, I walked in with a different kind of armor. In my hand was a folder, thick with evidence. At my side was Mrs. Green, calm and unshakable. Guests turned to look as I stepped inside, their whispers rising like waves. My mother-in-law's smile faltered when she saw me, but she quickly recovered, greeting guests as if nothing was wrong. Michael stood at the front, his face pale, his eyes darting away from mine. Then Mrs. Green did something I will never forget. She handed printed copies of the forged documents to the ushers and told them to distribute them. Page after page landed in the hands of guests, their eyes widening as they read the truth. The room fell into silence. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People stared at my mother-in-law, then back at me, then at Michael. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, as whispers turned to gasps. Someone near the front muttered, "She forged the papers." My mother-in-law tried to laugh it off, but her face betrayed her. Her voice cracked as she insisted, "This is a misunderstanding." But the documents told the story she couldn't deny. The lie she had built was unraveling in front of everyone. And as I stood there, clutching my veil, the truth hit me. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of a war that had just gone public. The back room of the wedding hall smelled of polished wood and stale perfume. That was where they pulled us after the documents spread through the crowd. My mother-in-law's face was pale, her lips tight, but she still tried to act like she had control. Michael sat across from me, his hands pressed against his forehead, avoiding my eyes. Lawyers circled the room, whispering in hushed tones. One of them finally turned to me and said, "We can negotiate a settlement here. Keep this quiet." The word quiet tasted like poison. I had been silent for too long, erased in front of people who were supposed to celebrate me. Now they wanted me to bury the truth in paperwork and signatures. Michael finally looked up, his eyes red. "Just sign, Clara. Let's move on." The betrayal in his voice cut deeper than any insult. Move on? Move on from my own stolen vows? Move on from a family who had treated me like a stranger? I sat perfectly still, my folder of evidence resting on the table between us. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry. Instead, I said, "This marriage isn't happening. Not like this." Silence followed, heavy and final. My mother-in-law gasped, and for the first time, her mask cracked. She realized she had won the battle but lost the war. The lawyers pushed papers across the table, and Michael signed them without hesitation. His hand didn't even tremble. Watching the man I once loved choose his mother's lies over me was worse than anything else. I sat there, empty, as ink dried where our future should have been. When it was done, I walked out of that room alone, the echo of my footsteps following me like a reminder that I had survived, even if love had not. I left Dallas that night and drove back to Tulsa. The road stretched endlessly, the hum of the tires louder than my thoughts. By the time I reached my father's house, the sun was rising over the Arkansas River. I collapsed into bed, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without fear. Days turned into weeks, and I began piecing myself back together. I worked long shifts at the hospital, poured my energy into caring for patients who needed me. Healing came in small ways. Coffee on the porch, long walks by the river, evenings spent cooking simple meals with my dad. Life was quiet, almost peaceful. But peace doesn't last when lies go unpunished. One afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found a thick envelope. My stomach dropped as I tore it open. It was a lawsuit. My mother-in-law was suing me for defamation, claiming I had ruined her reputation with lies. My hands shook as I read the words. She wasn't finished. She wanted to crush me completely. I sat on the porch steps, the paper flapping in the wind, and for a moment, I felt that old despair creeping back in. But then I thought of Mrs. Green, of Lena, of every page of evidence stacked in my folder. I wasn't defenseless. Not anymore. I looked at the letter one more time and whispered to myself, if she wants a fight, she'll get one. Mrs. Green didn't even flinch when I handed her the lawsuit. She scanned it quickly, then smiled. Perfect, she said. This opens the door for us to counter. So we did. We filed a countersuit, this time with every shred of proof we had collected. The forged contracts, the emails, the altered license drafts. For weeks, my life revolved around courtrooms and paperwork. I spent nights crying, wondering if I was strong enough to keep fighting, but every morning I woke up and forced myself to keep going. The hearings were brutal. Her lawyers painted me as unstable, desperate, a woman bitter because her engagement ended. They spoke with polished voices, but lies shine too brightly under light. My folder told a different story. One by one, the documents unfolded the truth. Signatures that didn't match, payments traced to her bank account, emails with her name in black and white. The judge leaned forward, his voice steady as he asked her, "Did you forge these documents?" She stammered, her confidence finally cracking. Watching her squirm under questions was like watching a storm lose its power. The ruling came weeks later. The judge dismissed her claims and sided with me, declaring her actions fraudulent. Damages were awarded in my favor. But more than the money, it was the vindication that filled me. The truth had spoken louder than her lies. That evening, I sat on my porch with Lena and Mrs. Green, sipping tea as the sun set. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. But the story wasn't over yet. Because when people are exposed, they don't always disappear quietly. News travels fast in Texas. Within days, the story hit local outlets. Bride erased from her own wedding. The headline spread online, shared by strangers who couldn't believe something so cruel could happen. I refused interviews, choosing instead to keep my head down and focus on my patients. But everywhere I went, people whispered. Some offered sympathy, others curiosity, all of them watching me as if I were a character in a movie. Walking into the hospital felt different. Nurses nodded at me with quiet respect. Patients grabbed my hand and said, "We saw what happened. You're stronger than most." Their words warmed me, but they also reminded me of the scars I carried inside. One night, as I was finishing my shift, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Michael. Just 4 words. "I was wrong. Forgive me." My chest tightened, and for a moment, I didn't know whether to cry or scream. The man who had let me be erased, who had chosen silence over love, was reaching for me now that the truth had burned his mother's empire to the ground. I stared at the message for a long time, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to delete it, to erase him the way I had been erased. Another part of me wanted to reply, to ask why, to demand answers I might never get. In the end, I set the phone down without responding. Some doors are better left closed. Months later, I drove past a quiet retirement home in Fort Worth. My father sat in the passenger seat, pointing it out with a hint of irony in his voice. "That's where she ended up," he said. I glanced at the building, its beige walls and small windows, and felt a strange calm wash over me. Michael's mother had been forced into retirement after the court case, her reputation destroyed, her influence gone. The same woman who tried to erase me now lived in the shadows, forgotten by the very community she once ruled. Poetic justice, I thought. Not loud, not violent, but quiet and permanent. I parked the car by the river that evening, the sun painting the sky in gold and crimson. My father and I sat on the hood, watching the water move slow and steady. I pulled the court ruling from my bag, the paper still crisp, and whispered, I wasn't erased after all. My life wasn't the one I had planned. There were no wedding rings, no honeymoon photos, no vows under glowing lights. But what I had gained was something stronger. I had found my voice, my strength, and the power to stand against those who thought they could write me out of my own story. Sometimes justice doesn't come with applause or revenge shouted from rooftops. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the steady beating of your own heart when you realize you survived. As the sky darkened, I thought of all the women who had been sidelined, overlooked, erased in their own ways. I hoped my story would reach them, that they would know strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I am still here." And with that whisper, I closed the chapter of my past and stepped quietly into my future, no longer afraid of being erased, because the truth had already carved my name where no one could take it away.